Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking to Antonia Bolingbroke-Kent, who is a travel writer, TV producer, and director of Edge Expeditions. She's written 3 books, penned numerous articles for magazines, and also set an unlikely Guinness World Record for driving a tuk-tuk 12,500 miles from Bangkok to Brighton. So, Antonia, where are you based at the moment?
I'm based in Bristol, in St Werburgh's in Bristol to be precise, where I've just got back here from being in Bolivia for 3 weeks. But yeah, this is my home, Bristol, has been for 10 years.
Oh, fantastic. Did you grow up in Bristol as well?
No, I grew up on the very far side of the country in the wild of North Norfolk. And I didn't purposely move to Bristol to get as far from Norfolk as possible. It just sort of happened.
I mean, you've had an absolutely fascinating career in adventure and writing and traveling and what you've done. Where do you think that passion came from?
I think I had a very free childhood. I grew up in a really rural part of North Norfolk. I was very outdoorsy. We always had animals. I was always climbing trees and riding horses and just messing around in the country. I suppose that it kind of started there. But also, both my parents really loved travel. My grandmother was living in Beijing in the 1930s. So perhaps it's something, genetic. My father's nearly 80 and still travels the whole time. So perhaps it's something in me. But all I know is that when I was at school and everyone else was going off to Oxford to train to be doctors and lawyers, all I wanted was to have a job that paid me to travel. I just wasn't interested in money or a sort of proper career.
Oh God, that sounds... Your grandmother must be an absolute legend, like living in Beijing in the 1930s. Wow, that's mind-blowing.
I know, yeah. She was about 4 foot high as well.
God. So did you go on lots of like family holidays or family adventures when you were younger?
We used to drive. My parents always had quite battered old cars, and we used to drive everywhere on holiday. We'd drive to Europe, and my father is an antiquarian book dealer, and my mother always joked that we never had any actual holidays. We had holidays, which is basically a book buying holiday. So we'd drive off to Italy or something and then come back with the car groaning under a ton of antiquarian books. So, we did travel a lot, but it wasn't like we were, tramping through the jungles of Papua New Guinea or anything. It was just Europe, really.
So for you, when did you decide that you wanted to, did you go on a solo adventure first of all, or did you end up taking a gap year or going with friends? Like, can you remember back to your first sort of travel adventure?
I started in a fairly moderate way, really, which actually, I didn't take a gap year. I went straight to university because I started university the last year. There were no fees, so I thought I'd better get on with it. But then during my university holidays, I would go off backpacking around Asia. So I went to Thailand and I went to Indonesia. So it was all pretty tame at first. And I guess it kind of it started the kind of extreme travel bug with December 2005, when my best school friend rang me up and said, did I want to drive from Bangkok to England with her in a pink tuk-tuk? My friend had recently recovered from a really severe bout of mental health problems, and she really wanted to do something to celebrate the fact that she was better. And so this is why she said, let's do something. Let's drive a tuk-tuk from Bangkok to England. So I said yes, and ditched my job at ITV and gave up my flat in London. And 6 months later, we were driving across the Gobi Desert in Ting Tong the tuk-tuk.
Oh my goodness! I mean, what was it when she came up with that suggestion? I mean, what was going through your head at that time? Thinking, "Oh my God, driving a tuk-tuk." Was that back in 2005 when you did it?
We did it the next year in 2006. So it all kind of happened quite quickly. But when she first asked me, what was going through my head was, "Oh my God, is she actually better?" Like, and then what was so funny is when we got to Thailand, we'd got this tuk-tuk custom built for us, and it was bright pink, and it was called Ting Tong, and we named it after a character in Little Britain, that comedy. And we found out that Ting Tong actually meant crazy, so it seemed really appropriate. And we spent 3.5 months driving across, I think it was 12 countries in Ting Tong, and we raised £50,000 for Mind, the mental health charity. And I think Jo, my friend, because she'd been so ill and had recovered, and she's now a doctor and has 4 children, she's been a real inspiration to lots of people who've suffered from mental health problems, to show that, you can get better. So it was an amazing trip and a serious amount of fun, and changed my life.
Absolutely incredible. Firstly, just that idea. I don't think that's ever been done before, or when you did it.
No. No, and also, things have changed a huge amount in the last 11 years. Adventures become so sort of big now, and there's lots of people who do these trips. But, driving from China to England was extremely unusual then, and no one had done it in a tuk-tuk. And, it was a real adventure.
Take us back to the first. Actually, I'd just be quite interested in sort of the planning and preparation of how easy it was to do back in 2006. Were you able to plan lots of the trips? Are you a planner, or are you guys more of a let's just get on the road and see where we go?
No, we planned it. Literally, I left my job, and we both dedicated 6 months to just totally planning it. And because we were absolutely dead set that we wanted to raise £50,000 for Mind, it was a huge undertaking, because it wasn't only ordering the tuk-tuk and getting it made and finding the right people in Bangkok who are going to make it, but planning the route. And there was a lot less information then about, borders and which roads to take, and raising money for charity and getting sponsors. And we spent loads of time just writing like hundreds of letters to everyone we knew and to celebrities and etc., saying what we were doing, would they sponsor us. We even wrote to Elton John. I had found out Elton John's home address by devious means and wrote him this letter saying, we're 2 girls driving a big tuk-tuk, and we got a cheque for £3,000 by return of post. So that was a big part of it, was raising the money for charity. Took a lot of work.
I think sometimes people underestimate what it takes to actually get these adventures and challenges off the ground, and to have that drive and determination to even get to the start line is phenomenal. So tell us a little bit more about the start and seeing the tuk-tuk for the first time.
So we got to Bangkok, and we went to the factory where it was being built, and they sort of hadn't finished it. They were still making it, and there were sort of lots of men on sewing machines making the roof and the chairs, and that was a bit alarming. And I got really ill in Bangkok just before we started. I think it had been so much work getting everything ready. I think it was just stress or something. And I got, I can't remember what exactly it was, but I basically was in hospital like the day before we left. And so we set off from the British embassy in Bangkok with the British ambassador and his wife waving us off. And I remember feeling like absolute crap, and really terrified, actually. And lots of people had been saying to us, oh, you're going to die, and what are you doing? And you're stupid, and you're 2 girls, and it's so dangerous. And I remember those first, that driving through the Bangkok traffic, sort of A, feeling terrible because I just got out of hospital, and B, just wondering what the hell we were doing.
What was it like those first couple of days? I've been to Bangkok before, and the first thing that I think about is just the craziness of the traffic, and whether it's tuk-tuks, cars, motorbikes, motorcycles, mopeds, just people everywhere. I'm sometimes quite scared of driving in the UK, but then driving in a foreign country, driving a tuk-tuk, not necessarily. I don't think the signs are in English, so I don't know if they're all written in Thai. So map reading, did you have sat nav?
No, we didn't. Obviously there weren't smartphones then, or were there? We didn't have one anyway. We just had paper maps. I can't remember how the hell we got out of Bangkok, actually, but it must have been quite difficult. But, I remember it just feeling so surreal, and just thinking, I just can't even contemplate the fact that we're going to drive this little vehicle 12,500 miles to England. And we just got into the habit of not thinking about the journey as a whole, but thinking where we wanted to get to that night. And actually, it's like every big journey I've done, the first bit is always quite terrifying and very sort of surreal, odd. And then very quickly you're into it and you found your rhythm and it just seems normal and all those fears have gone and it's just exciting.
And were you stopping off along the way to check out the sites, or was it very much, was there any like time pressure on you to get back in a certain time, or were you just like taking your time?
Joe had to be back so we set off at the beginning of May and Joe had to be back by mid-September to start medical school. And also because of the route we were going, we'd had to get a lot of our visas, and places like China and Kazakhstan, you have your set entry and exit dates and you have to be there by then. So we were kind of bound by that, but we had pretty much done like a daily thing for up to the end of Kazakhstan about, where we wanted to be by when. So we gave ourselves time to see things, but, we were also, getting on with it. China took a month to cross. China was massive. I mean, obviously China's massive, but you don't realize how massive it is until you're driving across it in a tuk-tuk. And because we were in a tuk-tuk, which is a three-wheeler, you're not allowed on the main roads, which we only found out when we got to China. So we had to drive on all these little bumpy back roads for, I can't remember, 4,500 miles, driving like 14 hours a day.
What was the biggest challenge on your trip, on your journey?
I don't know. What was the biggest challenge? I mean, we had some pretty major challenges, like, the front suspension going in really remote parts of China and in Crimea. And we got struck by an earthquake in northwest China. And we got to, when we got to the Kazakh border to leave Kazakhstan, our visa had run out. And we had a lot of problems along the way, but somehow everything just worked out. We always found a solution. So there were a lot of challenges, but somehow it all just fell into place. And, Joe and I got on fantastically and are still really close. And it was just a real laugh, as well as being really hard work.
Which country stands out for you?
I think northwest China and Kazakhstan. Northwest China, because it's so different to what we think of as China. It's Xinjiang. It's inhabited by the Muslim Uyghur people. It's desert. It just feels like the end of the world, and it's incredibly beautiful. And Kazakhstan, because we were driving through Kazakhstan at a time when no one went there. The only thing people knew about it was Borat, and we'd had so many warnings and emails about it, like, don't go to Kazakhstan, it's so dangerous, the border guards are going to take your tuk-tuk and take your money and rape you, and just turn back, go through Mongolia instead. And actually, when we got to the border with Kazakhstan, it's really remote border between China and Kazakhstan, the border guards gave us money for our charity, they gave us ice creams, they gave us cold drinks, they took our photos. And Kazakhstan was like that all the way. The Kazakhs were so friendly and welcoming, sometimes like aggressively so. They'd drive you off the road to give you some jam or cigarettes or something and take your photo. So it was just surprising and brilliant. It was just another one of those examples that you've got to go and do things for yourself and not believe all the naysayers, because they're mainly wrong.
Yeah. How old were you at this point?
We were 26, which I guess is quite young.
It is, but it totally is. I say, looking back now on that trip, how do you think it sort of changed, like, your perceptions of yourself, or in terms of building up your confidence and your love of going to places like northern China and Kazakhstan, and sort of the more remote or really, really remote place in the world that people don't necessarily understand?
Well, I think firstly, it really showed both of us that if you really want to do something, you're pretty much capable of doing anything. Like, we weren't ex-military gung-ho types. I hadn't been a scout, whatever it's called, a brownie. I had never done anything like this. We didn't have any idea about mechanics or PR or sponsorship or route planning, but we worked it all out and we did it. And we raised £50,000 and we fixed the tuk-tuk when it broke and we got sponsors. And so that's something that's always stayed with me, that, if you really want to do something, you can do it. And that generally you're capable of a lot more than you think you're capable of. And also it started a real love of Central Asia for me. And traveling in remote places and traveling in surprising places and bringing back positive stories about places which people might have perhaps a negative idea of from media. So, it was a really, really seminal trip. It totally changed the direction of the rest of my life.
Was it hard coming back from that trip and sort of adjusting back to real life? Like, did you adjust, or did you want to head off straight away? Or
yeah, it was incredibly hard, and it was something I learned a lot of lessons from how not to come back from a trip, because I had given up everything before. I'd given up my job in TV. I had left my flat in London. I came back with no money, and really, because it had been so all-consuming, this trip, I hadn't given any thought to what would come afterwards. You know, I had a vague idea that I wanted to write a book about it. But what I ended up doing was going back to live with my mother in Norfolk, bless her, and I get on really well with my mother. But I got really depressed when I got back. Actually, it was a really dark 6 months, just readjusting and just thinking, what the hell am I doing with my life? And then wrote the book and got a TV job in Bristol, and you know, life got better. But it's taught me that if you're going to do a good big adventure, make sure you have an idea of where you're going to live when you get back and what you're going to do, and put some money aside so you can have a few months to survive and think about things.
Yeah. I mean, how do you pick the countries that you want to go and do these incredible journeys in?
I think often it's just something that the sort of stories come to me, or it's sort of through other experiences that give me the idea. So, for example, a big journey I did a few years ago following the remains of the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Vietnam, Laos and Cambodia. You know, that idea came about through working on a TV documentary in the area and learning about the Ho Chi Minh Trail and thinking, this is amazing. It's 50 years after the war and the trail is disappearing. There's so many untold stories here, and it's a weirdly untravelled part of Southeast Asia, which we all think we know so well. And same with Arunachal, Pradesh. I heard about it when I was in India, again, working on a TV show. And I just thought, this is amazing. Who's been there? There's no one's written about it for a century. Like, I've got to go. So it's just chance and other experiences, really.
I mean, even just planning to go to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I mean, do you have? I suppose I'm quite interested in just sort of the process of deciding where you're going to go and how you're going to do it and what method you're going to use. You know, are you going to run it, walk it, cycle it, get on a motorbike, get on a moped, do it in a tuk-tuk? How did your Ho Chi Minh Trail challenge sort of evolve?
Well, I suppose I always thought I wanted to do it on a motorbike because that was the method of transport most used by local people, and the type of motorbike they used was a Honda Cub, which are these, you know, old, very, very simple, cheap Honda step-throughs, which, you know, I could pick one up cheaply there. Everyone would know how to fix it. Because it was a bike that was used a lot there, I would seem like less of an alien, you know, rather than coming in on some big four-wheel drive or a big expensive motorbike. I would seem more approachable, perhaps. So that was sort of naturally evolved about what method of transport I would use, and it was far too far to walk or cycle. And about where to go. I mean, I suppose I studied history at university, and I really love history, and I do a huge amount of research before my trips. So for the Ho Chi Minh Trail trip, I read a lot of books about the war, and I studied old maps, and I interviewed veterans on both sides. I used old military maps from the war to decide where I could go and what was still there. So it was, again, this process of research and just going where I could, really, and going to the most interesting places.
Tell us a little bit more about that trip. I mean, it's a huge sort of undertaking, and I hate almost bringing this up because I feel as though we shouldn't have to talk about it. But generally, whenever I tell people, I want to go do X, Y, and Z, the normal response I would get is like, but you're a female, you're doing it solo, you're doing it by yourself, aren't you scared, aren't you fearful, etc., etc., etc. And you obviously did the tuk-tuk challenge with your friend Joe, which is amazing. You know that there's two of you, but for this challenge, you're heading off by yourself. So how do you manage those fears that you may have, or that other people may be pushing onto you?
Yeah, I mean, it's totally different traveling alone, and I decided before the Ho Chi Minh Trail trip that I absolutely wanted to do this journey alone, and that I needed to sort of test myself and see if I was up to it. And I knew that traveling alone, you just have to be so much more self-sufficient, and if things go wrong, you've got no one else to rely on. And I relished the thought of that. But yeah, of course, it came with its fears, and I was really nervous before. I had a lot of sleepless nights about being blown up by an unexploded bomb left over from the war, or eaten by a tiger, or attacked by a snake or a spider, or all those things that a lot of women fear, about being raped. Or I was really nervous. But as soon as I set off, again, the first day, I was terrified. And then a few days later, I was into it and I was loving it, and the journey had taken over. So it's always this thing that the fears of something are so much worse than the actual reality. And once you actually get going, it's fantastic. And of course, there were some really sticky moments on that journey. But somehow, even when you're in those moments and it really is genuinely dangerous, it's not as bad as the fears you had in the months leading up to it at 3 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah. I mean, Vietnam's an incredible country, just the history and everything else that goes on there. What did you learn most, or what was sort of unexpected that you learned that maybe you hadn't come across in your research?
Most unexpected. I mean, obviously, in my research, I'd found out about just quite how much unexploded ordnance was still left over from the Vietnam War, and the statistics are so shocking. That Laos was bombed on average every 8 minutes for almost a decade. That it's still the most bombed country on earth per capita. That hundreds of people still die a year from unexploded bombs. But I think what I was most shocked by, actually, when you're traveling through these areas that were once on the Ho Chi Minh Trail and were heavily bombed, quite how much people today are still affected. Because you can read as many statistics as you want, but they're almost so huge they beg a belief. But when you actually go to these villages and you meet people whose son was killed a few weeks ago because he accidentally picked up a cluster bomb thinking it was a ball to play with, or you meet a man in the field whose son was blown up a couple of years before, that's when you just think, oh my God, these people are living with us every day, 50 years after a war that was nothing to do with them. So yeah, it was shocking.
And what are other people's reactions to you being a Western woman, travelling out there? How are you received by the locals?
Often with great surprise. I think particularly being a woman, actually, because I've got a motorbike helmet on, and people often wouldn't realise I was a woman until I rode right past them, until I stopped and took my helmet off. And in Lao, the word for girl is pusu, and often people would go, pusu. It's like, oh my God, it's a girl. But people were never unfriendly, always just very full of smiles and welcoming. I mean, obviously, very few people spoke English, so it was, communication by sign language and Google Translate. But I never felt threatened.
So what stands out for you from that trip? Is there a moment or a memory or something that happened that just sticks in your mind?
Oh gosh, lots.
I know that's difficult because there'll be so many.
God, there was a day when I met these two former American pilots who were in their 70s who'd come back to sort of see this remote part of the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos that they had bombed 50 years ago. And it was really interesting spending time with them and hearing their perspective and the after effects of the war on them. And we were walking through the jungle one day in search of this particular place that they had once tried to bomb. And really, in this jungle, you should never walk off the track because there's so much unexploded ordnance. And in our excitement, we walked off the track and we narrowly missed standing on a cluster bomb. I mean, my foot was like a couple of feet from it, and it would have blown us all up. So that was quite a moment. And then I had a quite a scary day in the Cambodian jungle where my motorbike was stuck in the mud and I had to leave it and walk for help. And this is an extremely remote area with no phone signal, with tigers, no one around. And it was the only time in my life that I've actually considered that I might die. But I got helped by some people who I stumbled across in the darkness, and I was very lucky.
Oh my God. I mean, that feeling of isolation and knowing that it is just you out there in the jungle, knowing that it's your wits, your decisions, do actually really, really count. I mean, coming back to the UK, you obviously, you do these incredible adventures, you then sort of write about them. How do you find that writing process?
Well, it's a bit like life. Every day is different. Every book is different as well. Personally, I treat writing like a job, and I don't do anything else during the period when I'm writing a book. I don't give talks, I don't do any TV work. I just write 5 to 7 days a week from 9 till 6. And I become very antisocial, and I block myself off, and I totally immerse myself in the writing. I find there's days and weeks when it's relatively easy and it's flowing, and then you have days where it's like wading through mud, and you just wish you'd never decided to write a book. So yeah, it takes it out of you. I find that by the time I finish a book, I'm totally done in. Need a holiday.
What is a holiday for you?
Good question. My boyfriend and I are going to the Lake District next week. We're going up to the Kendal Mountain Festival. I've got to give a talk, and then we're going to have like 3 days walking. So that's a holiday.
That's a holiday. Oh no. Oh. With writing and thinking back, you obviously get that time to reflect when you're sharing your stories, which is absolutely amazing. How do you keep motivated? I
think sometimes to my detriment. I'm a very self-motivated person, and I get totally consumed by the writing and the stories, and I'm very passionate about the stories I write about. So I was really passionate about the Ho Chi Minh Trail and about telling those stories, and about doing justice to the people I'd met and their stories. And it's such a harrowing tale, and so endlessly fascinating. It was very easy to stay motivated. And the same with my book about Arunachal Pradesh, my latest book, and that I had such a formative journey through this land and been taken in by so many different tribes and fantastic people who'd shared their stories with me. And I felt such affection for them and such a desire to, again, do justice to them and their kindness and their stories, that it just motivates you, really. Also, having a publishing deadline motivates you.
It definitely helps, So tell us about your latest book. Now, I'm probably going to butcher the name, Arunachal Pradesh. Where is it? How did it come about? How did you sort of narrow it down to this region, to this area?
Well, I was working on a TV documentary in Delhi about 5 years ago, and I thought I knew India quite well. I'd been there about 5 times before, but somehow, like so many of us, I just wasn't aware of this part of northeast India, which is sort of sandwiched between Tibet and Bhutan and Burma and Bangladesh. And an Indian producer I was working with in Delhi was one of the few outsiders to have travelled there, and during the week we were working together. He fired my imagination with tales of this unmapped wilderness and Yeti sightings and shamans with magical powers, and I just thought, I've got to go there. I'm going to write my next book about this place. And when I came back to England and I started researching, I found out that really nothing had been written since the colonial era, that very few people knew about it, that it was this sort of weirdly blank space in the popular imagination. And it's these places at the edge of the map, kind of at the edge of our consciousness, that really excite me, these unknown places. So I spent about a year and a half planning it, researching it, reading, getting the necessary permits, because you have to have permits to visit the region, and raising the money. And then, went off and spent 2.5 months travelling across Arunachal Pradesh.
I mean, how much does it cost to do? I mean, I know that's a big question, but in terms of raising the funds and how much you need to do these expeditions, are you self-funding the expeditions? Is it all through sponsorship? I mean, how does that side of things work?
My Ho Chi Minh Trail trip, I very much self-funded. So I work as a freelance TV producer sometimes as well. And the year before I did the Ho Chi Minh Trail trip, I knew that I was going to do this trip the next year and I wanted to write a book. And I just worked my butt off in TV that year and squirreled away as much money as I could and self-funded my trip. It wasn't that expensive. I think the trip itself was less than £3,000 for 2 months, just because I took a hammock, I was sleeping in my hammock, I was sleeping in just anywhere, eating really cheap food, on a cheap bike. You know, I travel simply and cheaply, and I like it like that. With the Arunachal trip, I had a small advance from my publisher, Simon & Schuster, and I got a grant from the Transglobe Expedition Trust. I had a tiny bit of kit sponsorship from Snugpack, but otherwise I just paid for it myself. And again, it wasn't very expensive.
So what was it like heading out? I mean, I think one thing that everyone needs to go and have to do is actually to go and visit your website to actually see the map of where the region is. Because whenever I think of India, I can obviously picture India where it is. And then I know Nepal's up there. You've got Pakistan obviously bordering on it. And then I sort of think that Bangladesh attaches to China and Nepal, but actually there's this like whole little area which is almost like so far away, you know, on the northeastern side. So it's definitely worth just having a quick look. I mean, was it easy enough to get there? Like, can you fly there commercially?
Well, you fly to Delhi and then get a connecting flight to Assam, and Assam is one of the neighbouring states to Arunachal Pradesh. And then I bought a cheap motorbike, a locally made bike in Assam, and travelled across Assam and into Arunachal Pradesh. So it's not that hard to actually get into the state, but some of the places I walked to, because I walked and rode a motorbike on that trip, but some of the places I realised you'd have to travel at least 10 days from the UK to reach. You know, they were so remote.
Oh, so what was it like sort of being able to actually experience this region, which has probably, like you said, you know, no one's written about it since the colonial times, and very few tourists. I mean, I can't really imagine there was a lot of other tourists out there at the same time as you, or were there?
Oh, no. I mean, there's a few tourists who go to Arunachal Pradesh, but they go to essentially one place in the west called Tawang, which has a very famous monastery. But the whole central and eastern section of the state, just no one goes to. So I think I met like a French ethno-linguist and a German ethno-linguist who was studying the Idu Mishmi tribal language. But otherwise, I just didn't meet anyone. No one goes there. I mean, almost no Indians go there.
So tell us about. I mean, I'm reading on your blog as well about the time you got drunk with nuns, which sounds hysterical. But what was it like, sort of meeting the shamans, the nuns, the tribes out there, the people?
It was just incredibly fascinating, enlivening, heartwarming. The lives people lived and the stories they told and their sort of sense of magic and their animist belief systems were just so interesting. And one thing that struck me again and again there was how cheerful people seemed and how much more contented they were with their lives than we are in the West. And you know, people there live in the tribal communities. They live in these very remote regions. They grow a lot of their own food. They live very close to nature. They have very strong communities. They have very strong, you know, family structures. And although their life is really tough, you know, a lot of people live days walk from any medical help, or they live in a wilderness where there are bears and tigers, and you know, it's a hard life, but they just were so much happier. And it made me think a lot about our sort of sedentary, screen addicted Western lifestyles, and how we all seem to be getting fatter and more miserable, and yet these tribal communities who desperately want to be more Western are so much happier.
Yeah. Sometimes you always want which is the things that you can't necessarily have, or, you know, the grass is always greener.
Grass is always greener, yeah. So So it was a real honour to meet these people, and just so interesting hearing their stories and learning about their lives and their tribes.
I mean, do you have like a daily routine while you're out traveling, or do you try and have a structure to your day, or do you purposefully try not to have a routine or a structure?
No, I don't have any sort of routine or structure. I mean, I have a vague idea of where I'm going to go. I normally kind of think, where I want to end up that night, but no, I don't. I mean, I always write my diary in the evenings, but other than that, no, I just do whatever comes naturally. And if there's people who I want to stop and talk to or places I want to go, then I do that. Yeah, you need to kind of be free when you travel like this. So, because otherwise you're going to miss out on things.
Yeah. I mean, do you miss anything when you're traveling or when you're out there?
Oh, obviously, I miss my boyfriend. That's always really hard, leaving him behind for such long periods. I really miss hot baths. Occasionally, just because on that trip, I was bucket washing out of cold buckets for 2 months. So occasionally I'd be like, I really want a hot bath and a good gin and tonic. But otherwise, no.
2 months out there, just so remote, so far away from, I don't want to say like humanity, that's the wrong word, but yeah, just so far away from almost like the Western world. What we're used to. And obviously you get a lot of time to think because you're traveling by yourself. So did you ever feel isolated or lonely, or is this actually this 2 months off, the time that you really savor and enjoy?
I very, very, very rarely feel lonely when I do those trips. I think because I'm so engrossed in it and I enjoy it so much, and I'm constantly meeting people. I find it so mentally stimulating doing these journeys, and I love telling stories, and every day you're learning things and hearing stories and meeting people. It's like brain food. I just feel alive and stimulated.
Yeah. I mean, you've done some incredible expeditions, which is absolutely amazing. Could you share more about Edge Expeditions and how you started it up, why you do it?
Yeah, so my boyfriend and I started Edge Expeditions a couple of years ago, and I just wanted to take people traveling to some of the places that I really love. So we're a tiny company. We run like about 6 expeditions a year to places that really excite us, like Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, Bolivia, Palestine. And we just come back from a 2-week walking trip in Palestine with the lovely Leon McCarran. And again, sort of, it's an extension of my and his traveling ethos about going to slightly surprising places and bringing back positive stories, and just traveling a bit differently.
What's the best? Have you got any more expeditions coming up this year or next year?
No, we've just finished, so we've just done Bolivia and Palestine. But next year, at the beginning of 2019, I'm very excited about a trip we're doing in winter in Tajikistan. We're working with a local NGO and going to an area where there's very high density of snow leopards. And we're going to take a group who are going to hopefully spot snow leopards and work really closely with this NGO and help set camera traps and go into schools and teach with local children the value of their local wildlife. So I'm really excited about that trip because it's something that's totally different. And Tajikistan is somewhere that I absolutely adore and just want to go back to again and again.
That, like, running your own expedition company is absolutely awesome because you can decide, all the places that you want to go visit or explore, or the places you want to go back to. You get to obviously, earn income from it, which is amazing, but also meet and connect with other people on these expeditions. I mean, do you have like a favorite one, or how did you pick the expeditions that you wanted to put out and do?
Again, it's just places that kind of like sing to us that we're really interested in, and I think my favourite one so far is a motorbike trip we do in Tajikistan, just because Tajikistan is such a special country and so little known, and I think misunderstood, and the people are extraordinarily kind and hospitable, and the landscape is mind-blowing. And I love taking people there because they have sort of no expectations because they know nothing about it. And someone said the other day, he said, God, I didn't even know how to spell it when I went. And then they come back and they're like, oh my God, it's so amazing. And they tell people that it's wonderful and how kind the people were. And yeah, so it's fantastic having an expedition company. But we're both just very aware that, we want to make our company as ethical as possible and to travel in places where tourism is having a positive impact, not a negative one. And as we all know, tourism definitely has a negative impact in a lot of places.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine you'll be similar to me. The more you travel, the more you meet people, the more you see of the world, the more that you want to see of the world, the more expeditions that you want to go on. Do you have like a bucket list, or do you have a list of countries or places or trails that you want to go and explore and see more of?
I don't have a bucket list, but there's definitely, I have a sort of an idea. There are places that really call to me. So, for example, at the moment, I really want to go to Pakistan. There is the border between Tajikistan and China has very recently opened, which means it's now very easy to cross from Tajikistan into China and then almost immediately into Pakistan over the Kunjrat Pass. And that northern bit of Pakistan, sort of Gilgit-Baltistan, Hunza, is incredibly beautiful and very little travelled, and again, really misunderstood. So that is top of my list at the moment, and somewhere I'm looking at on a map a lot.
And would that be sort of like another adventure that you'd write a book about, or have you got something else in mind for like your next book?
Who knows? I haven't actually got any concrete ideas for my next book. I'm always sort of casting around. It's like I'm more sort of fishing for ideas and keeping my eye on things, looking at maps and reading books. And but I think Pakistan, I just want to go and have a look actually. And again, it's somewhere that has people are like, oh, it's really dangerous, and without doubt, it seems that some parts are dangerous. But I've met people recently who've travelled in northern Pakistan and have just said such positive things about it and how wonderful the people were. And again, I want to be able to bring back some positive stories about somewhere that maybe doesn't have the most positive image.
Yeah. So if you've got advice and tips for other women and men out there who are thinking, I do want to go and travel to distant corners of the globe, what advice and tips would you have for other individuals who are thinking of doing more adventuring?
I think I think it's very easy to make excuses all the time about why you can't go and do these trips. Like, oh, there's no one to look after my dog, or I miss my boyfriend, or I haven't got enough money. And I think you've just got to stop making excuses and just go. Put it on a credit card, rent out your house, and get someone to walk your dog.
Absolutely. Now, where is the best place for people to find more information out about you?
My website, theitinerant.co.uk. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter, both as AntsBK. Yeah, they're the best places, definitely.
Now, Ants, I know that you actually do a lot of speaking engagements and talks. I think you've got a talk coming up in February. Do you just want to share where that is and where people can get tickets?
Yes. So I'm giving a talk at the Destinations Travel Show as part of the Stanford Literary Festival, and that is in London, and it's on the Thursday, the 2nd of February. I suppose you can get tickets on the Destinations website, which I'm not sure what it is.
That's okay, don't worry. I'll include some links in the show notes. Ants, thank you so much for coming on the Tough Girl podcast to share more about your amazing life, the different expeditions that you've been on, and what you've learned from traveling and poking around in these incredible unknown corners around the world. Absolutely inspiring.
Thank you so much for having me.
Hey tribe, how you doing? I hope you enjoyed that episode with Ants. What an absolute incredible inspiration. She has definitely been to some of the more remote parts in the world. If you are interested in exploring and getting out to some of the less well-known countries, then definitely take a listen to Arita Bajan. I had Arita back on the podcast, I think it was in like 2015, but Arita is an explorer of the physical and mental world. She spent decades following her passion for the desert, and she has visited some of the most remote and inhospitable places on the planet. She's also a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society and a member of the Explorers Club. So Arita is definitely a very fascinating podcast to listen to if you're interested in those more remote countries. Talking of travel, there's obviously different ways that you can travel. Speaking with lowest price, lowest rode a motorcycle all the way through the Americas. She's also rode through Africa, and most recently she rode her bike through Iran. She's written a couple of great books. Again, a very different way to travel and see the world. Juliana Buring, she is the fastest woman to cycle around the world. So if you're thinking of a cycling trip, you maybe not wanting to do it as fast as she did it, but listening to Juliana will be another inspiring episode. We spoke to Della Parsons at the end of 2017 about how she quit her job to go and sail around the world. And I'd also recommend you taking a listen to Emma Timmis. She ran across Africa twice, which is absolutely phenomenal. So all I'm trying to say here is there are so many incredible women that I've interviewed on the Tough Girl podcast. We've got episodes going back to 2015 now. So there's over hundreds of hours of content. If you are new to the podcast, please do go check out toughgirlchallenges.com. On the website, you can find more information about the podcast, about the guests. You can read more information on the blog. You can learn more about the books that I've written, the challenges that I've done. So in 2016, I ran the Marathon des Sables and wrote a book about it, Tough Girl Sahara Challenge. In 2013, I think it was, I climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. If you're thinking of doing something like that, you can definitely check out my book as well. And in 2017, I thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail, walking 2,190 miles in 100 days. There is no book about that, but there is a vlog. So you can actually watch every single day of my journey. Although guttingly, apart from day 99, because I lost the footage. But if you want to see some emotional footage, definitely check out vlog 97. Lots of emotions getting to the end of my trip. So please do go check out toughgirlchallenges.com. I always love to hear from you. So please do send me a tweet at @tough_girl. I'm also on Instagram at toughgirlchallenges. The only thing that is left for me to say is just thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you listening to the Tough Girl podcast every Tuesday when it comes out at 7 in the morning or whenever you listen to it. The fact that you've invested this time, it means a huge amount to me. And I could not do this without my patrons, without the financial supporters of the podcast. There's 150 patrons, 150 women and men behind the podcast who every month donate between $2 a month and $20 a month to help fund the running costs. Nothing is free in this world, and it does cost me my time and actual physical money to produce all of this content. If you like what you hear, if you're inspired every single week and you listen every single week, then please do consider becoming a patron. It makes a huge difference. You just need to visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast. Again, all the links are on my website. Sign up, donate. Think of it as a magazine subscription. Think of it as like a Netflix subscription, but it is a subscription to the Tough Girl podcast. And you help me to put more content out there, help me to increase the amount of female role models in the media, to help get these women's stories heard, because women just don't get the exposure that they deserve. And to tell you what, I am building up a huge resource of incredible women who are runners, triathletes, mountaineers, swimmers, explorers, adventurers, you name it, kayakers, ocean rowers, they keep popping into my head. Then I want to get these stories out there, and I can make it happen with your help. So please do go check out toughgirlchallenges.com. All right, guys, have an awesome day wherever you are, whatever you are doing. Just get out there, smash it, have some fun, sign up to that challenge, say yes to that adventure, book that holiday, book that race. You know you want to do it. The only thing you're going to regret is not doing it. So do it right now. Take care. I'll speak to you soon. Lots of love. Bye.